Hi everybody, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I'm glad you're back with me again today. So we're going to continue reading our book, Mad Dog of Lobo Mountain. This is in the D.J. Dillon series by Lee Roddy. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I'm enjoying reading it. There we go, I think that's better. Anyhow, I have been searching for this book like crazy for about 3 minutes, and I just couldn't figure out what I did with it, and it was underneath another book. Do you ever do that? Well, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel, press the like button, and I would love to get a comment on anything that you want to talk about. But maybe you'll want to talk about what's happening in this chapter, what you think is going to happen next. That's an idea. All right, chapter 5, A Terrible Discovery. DJ's whole body was jerked about as Corporal Brackett fought the wheel of his patrol car. It climbed slowly up the neck-snapping excuse of a road across the highway from Devil's Point Campground. The faint tracks led up to the steep side of Saddleback Ridge, a rugged mountain thick with tall conifers. There was a well-worn foot trail across the lower section, or the saddle, but so few four-wheel drive vehicles ever came this way, it wasn't really a road. DJ figured Mr. Schmickel must not own a vehicle, or he certainly didn't drive it this way very often. It was obvious he didn't have visitors drive in either. So there just wasn't a road. Rooster tails of dust rose from the two sheriff's units bouncing ahead of the boys and the corporal. DJ twisted his head to look behind. Hank Wilmond, the animal control officer, was barely visible in his pickup truck because of the choking cloud spewed up from the 3 leading patrol cars. So much dust. Out the side window, DJ could see magnificent evergreen trees and black oaks that grew on the mountainsides. It was a beautiful, peaceful-looking area far back from the main roads. It was hard to believe how dangerous this trip might be until the boys again faced forward. Through the windshield, thick with dust, DJ saw the 2 leading cars slow down at a fence line. On both sides of the cattle guard that served as a gate were 2 hand-lettered signs, each read, "Keep out or else." Corporal Brackett slowed and stopped, letting the dust plume fall away behind him. "Okay, DJ, this is as far as you go. Get out and wait for Hank. You'll be safe here while the rest of us go in. But if you hear any trouble, tell Hank I said for both of you to get out of here and radio for more backup." DJ nodded and stepped out excuse me, until a weed-choked roadway. It was barely more than a trail, with brush growing head high on both sides. The boy waved to Corporal Brackett. He pulled ahead, following the 2 other units across the cattle guard and on towards Mr. Schmickel's cabin. By the time Mr. Wayman's pickup stopped for the boy, DJ could see the deputies had pulled to a large open area of an acre or 2. Trees and weeds had been cleared to form a kind of yard. There the boys sat on a woodpile. A tumbleweed corrugated metal shed. Oh, he saw a woodpile. A tumbleweed corrugated metal shed and a relic of a windmill with a leaning tank house. A huge pile of dry brush had been gathered in the middle of an open space. The deputies left their cars and spread out. They walked past the brush pile. DJ thought he heard one of the men call out as they moved slowly towards the weathered cabin. It was barely visible in the shadows of the tall trees at the edge of the yard. The boy turned to the animal control officer who sat behind the pickup wheel. Shouldn't we have heard the dog barking by now? Yes, if he's there. Personally, I'm glad it's so quiet. At least the old man's not blasting away at them. DJ tried to feel better. He turned back towards the cabin. The deputies were out of sight, but a scrub jay scolded them in harsh tones. An invisible quail called out sharp warning cries. Otherwise, all was serene and peaceful. Several minutes passed. Then the boy's eyes caught a movement on the far side of the brush pile. A mother quail was leading perhaps a dozen marble-sized chicks from the brush. Oh, that's so tiny. They ran with amazing speed for such tiny things. DJ smiled and pointed. Mr. Wayman chuckled. She's trying to sneak out and into the heavier shelter of the woods where the men can't see her brood. He paused and then continued softly. I don't know why anyone in this country would let such a bunch of brush pile up like that. It's a real fire hazard out here in these woods. That pile should have been burnt before the fire season started. DJ looked up towards the high mountain and pointed. At least there's a fire station lookout close. They'd spot any smoke real fast. Mr. Wayman leaned down so he could look up where DJ was pointing. That's Lobo Peak. Nice older couple spends their summers up there in the fire lookout station year after year. It's lonely work, but it's very necessary. You should do a story about them for the paper sometimes, DJ. He started to answer when he caught a slight movement out of the corner of his eye. DJ swiveled his head to peer at the edge of the timber by the old recluse's shanty. Somebody was moving there, but all DJ could see was a man's shadow. The boy's heart leaped into full gallop. Then he sighed softly with relief. Corporal Brackett stepped out into the open and walked past the brush pile toward the pickup. In a moment, the officer stuck his head through the pickup window. No sign of the dog, but there's evidence he's been here recently. The other deputies are making a quick search of the area in case the dog's nearby. Hank, maybe you should go see if you want to set up your trap around here. DJ fought the disappointment that choked his throat. What about Mr. Schmickel? The deputy shook his head sadly. He's dead. Dead? DJ Mr. Wayford echoed. Been that way a day or so, I guess. But we don't know if he died from natural causes or what? DJ prompted. Or from something else. Like what? The officer hesitated a moment, then answered. We found signs of a dog bite on his leg. DJ's blood scalded through his body and tingles of fear raced over his skin, leaving goosebumps everywhere. He asked softly, You mean maybe he died from rabies? The corporal replied, We don't know the real cause of death until we get the report from the coroner. The old man could have died from something else, like maybe a heart attack. I'd guess he was around 80. The animal control officer opened his door. I'll go see about locating a trap here. Will you take DJ back to camp? Just as soon as I radio in my report. DJ, are you okay? You look a little pale. I was thinking about that little lost boy with the dog bite. If the same dog bit him that bit Mr. Schmickel, the deputy interrupted. That kid's diabetes problem is more immediate than any possible rabies infection. We've got a few days on that before he absolutely has to receive treatment. DJ felt guilt wash over him like a giant wave. If anything happened to Roger, it would be DJ's fault. And all because of a simple little neglected responsibility to Hero. It didn't seem to DJ that things got worse, but when the corporal had finished radioing his report, he asked the woman dispatcher, "Any news on the search for the lost boy at Devil's Point?" "Negative." The female voice from the car speaker was calm and professional. 21 reported by radio that his scent dog had picked up on the child's trail, but no sign of him yet. The corporal glanced at DJ and quickly explained, 21 is the radio identification number of Dan Hubble, the dog handler. Corporal Brackett punched the send button on his handheld microphone. He spoke into it. "What about volunteers searching for the dog that bit the child?" "Negative. No sightings reported on any dog." DJ sighed softly and lowered his head. The driver seemed to understand the boy's emotional pressure. Neither spoke all the way back to the campground as the officer's patrol unit turned into the gate. DJ saw that the campground was deserted except for Spink's camper. Corporal Brackett said, "Guess all the campers cleared out for fear there's a rabid dog loose in the area." Just then, Baker Spinks stepped from behind the dense cedar and directly into the path of the patrol unit. DJ felt perspiration suddenly roll down his ribcage. He just began sweating. Corporal Brackett, just one second. Corporal Brackett braked the car and whispered, "DJ, you stay here and don't say anything." The officer quickly got out of the car, sliding his baton into the ring at his belt. Remember, the baton is like a small bat. "Morning again, Mr. Spinks. How's it going?" The man glowered at DJ. That's an angry look. And kept walking toward the car. The boy swallowed hard as the officer changed direction slightly, blocking the bearded man's way. Baker Spinks pointed a long finger at DJ and snapped, "That kid sitting in your car won't always have you around. If my son ain't found soon, or if anything happens to him, you can't protect that kid or his father." "Mr. Spinks, are you threatening the Dillons?" The man didn't answer. He turned abruptly and walked rapidly back across the deserted campground towards the lone remaining camper. The officer returned to the car, removing his baton. He placed it between the driver's seat and the one where the boy was sitting. "DJ, I think it might be better if you and your father go back to town. Alfred, the big preacher, and the rest of your friends can carry on the search here until dark." On the way down to the county seat, DJ remembered he hadn't written anything for the newspaper all week. The boy didn't relish the idea of telling that to Elmer Kirsten, the editor, who owned and published the weekly. Mr. Kirsten had long ago made it clear that the first time the DJ missed a deadline, the boy was through as a stringer. That would be the end of his job. The good smell of newsprint filled DJ's nose as he entered the weekly newspaper's front office. Mrs. Haskell, The middle-aged receptionist and bookkeeper looked up from her metal desk and called a greeting. DJ waved back, but he didn't stop. He pushed through the waist-high swinging gate at the end of the counter. DJ walked through a second door in the rear. Mr. Curson had an open door policy, so his office was always open to anybody who wanted to walk in. The room was small, cramped, and untidy. There was barely room for the editor, his desk and chair, a visitor's chair, several ancient wooden filing cabinets, and 2 radio receivers. The one sitting on the top of an unpainted bookcase was tuned in to the county sheriff's frequency. So that's what we call a scanner now. The receiver on the second shelf monitored the California Highway Patrol transmissions. The walls were crowded with award plaques and aging news photos. Mr. Curson sat before an untidy roll-up desk, editing a copy of a tiny section of flat surface where the clutter had been shoved back. Every pigeonhole in the desk overflowed with letters and scraps of paper. The editor was a tall man with shoulders stooped from many years of leaning over a typewriter. A rim of pure white hair ran around the back of his head and above his ears. Otherwise, he was totally bald. He sat well back from his desk because his stomach had slipped and stuck out farther than his chest. He didn't look up or acknowledge the boy's presence. After a moment, DJ cleared his throat and sat down uneasily on the battered metal folding chair next to the editor's. "Mr. Kirsten," the boy began, "I'm not going to be able to write anything for you this week. You see, The editor interrupted without stopping his work or even raising his eyes. His voice was harsh. "DJ, I've got deadlines to meet and a paper to fill. People expect news, not excuses. Now you remember my rule. If you can't meet your responsibilities, I'll get someone who will." DJ swallowed hard, took a slow breath. That was the word again. Responsibilities. For a moment, the boy sat silently, watching the editor's quick, sure movements. DJ wondered how the small-town newspaper editor could seem to do 2 things at once. He worked in an absolute mess. His cluttered desk was piled high with an incredible amount of newspapers, stacks of ordinary paper, and envelopes from which he periodically fished other press releases from. After reading the first line, he usually crumpled the paper and threw it back into the wastebasket with a muttered, angry comment. When he did keep a sheet, the editor cut drastically, omitting whole paragraphs by quick strokes of very soft editing pencil. Finally, he stopped and leaned back in his old battened chair that squeaked as if it were in pain. "DJ, I've already heard most of your problems from listening to the sheriff's radio frequency." Mr. Kirsten pointed his pencil at the radio on the top shelf. "I'm sorry about the lost boy and your dog, but I'm here and there's nothing you can do for anybody right now except meet your obligations to this newspaper. So even though you're an independent contractor that I can't order to do anything as I would an employee, I want you to listen." DJ nodded. "I'm listening." "I'd like you to write a first-person story about the whole thing just as it happened." First person as he's telling the story himself. "I'm so mixed up inside I can barely think, let alone write." The editor spun back to his editing. The pencil flew over the sheet. "DJ, have you ever heard that some editors are about the meanest people alive? DJ had heard that, but he didn't want to admit it. He didn't say anything. Mr. Kirsten added, "Well, it's true. And I'll tell you what makes us so mean. We've got deadlines to meet. And people bring us junk to print and want me to write their puff stories for them. I'll give the space free. Why should I do any more work than necessary?" The boy didn't say anything. So the editor continued, "Your job as a reporter is to get the facts. Get them right, get them now, and get them in spite of everything. So grab a pencil and I'll tell you what to do." DJ took a deep breath. This was the last thing he wanted to do. Yet failing to do what he should have gotten him into trouble before, the boy reached towards the editor's desk for a paper and pencil. Wow. So that's the end. DJ has to get a story out, even with everything else that's going on. And sometimes it is hard to fulfill all of our responsibilities. We've got things we're supposed to do. And sometimes we get busy. Maybe somebody comes by. Maybe we don't feel good. Maybe we're just being lazy. Whatever the reason, we have to take our responsibilities seriously. So now DJ's doing his. I hope you enjoyed today's chapter, and I will be reading to you again tomorrow. I hope you have a good night or a good day whenever you're watching this. Always remember, I love you. I really do. But more importantly, God loves you, and He always will. Good night.